Hi, I'm Veronica, and this is Veronica's Bookshelves. Welcome to my channel. Today, we're going to be talking about all the books that I've read in the month of May. It's what we call a May wrap up. So, before further ado, let's begin. The first book I want to talk about is a book that is part of the trilogy, the Shadow and Bone trilogy, and it's Siege and Storm, which is book number 2 of the Shadow and Bone trilogy. And it's by Leigh Bardugo. Of course, let me just do a disclaimer here. I have not read these books before, so this is not a reread, and I have not watched the Netflix series. So honestly, I'm just trying to avoid spoilers as much as I can. It's really hard sometimes when you are on Instagram and so on. People will talk about the books and you see things, but I just try not to read too much into it and try to not see or, it's really hard, but I'm really trying. So I've read the first book a couple of weeks ago. I think in March I've read the first book, and I really enjoyed it. I actually published a review of this book on my Instagram account. So if you'd like to check that out, just follow me on Instagram or just check the post on Instagram and read my review there if you're interested in reading the review. So sometimes it's funny because when you read the first book of a trilogy or a duology, you feel like, oh, it's amazing. If you really enjoyed that book, you feel like the second one perhaps is not going to be too good. You feel like, oh, maybe I'm gonna feel a bit disappointed by the second book and so on. I was not disappointed at all by this book. Honestly, I was thrilled from the moment I've started reading it to the moment I finished reading it. I just felt like, whoa, how can a second book of an installment be as good as the first one? That was my first impression when I've actually started reading it. Within the first few pages, I just felt like, whoa, this book promises to me that it's going to be as good as the first book. And it was. Of course, in this second book, we are introduced to a few new characters, side characters of the story. Of course, as you know, we follow Alina Starkov. Um, she's an orphan, and she finds out that she has a power that can destroy something that is threatening the world that she lives in. She lives in Ravka, which is a Russian-like type of country. And the storyline follows her, and of course the opposing force to her, which is called he's called the Darkling. And there is an amazing dynamic between these two characters that it's really enjoyable to read if you like the plot of the enemy being trying to seduce the good person in the storyline. But what I like the most about Alina, it's because there is a dubious thing about her. She's not too goody goody, right? She has her flaws. It's quite there's a very human element to her and some of the struggles that she goes through, especially in this second book, and some of the things that go through her head. And I think in terms of character development, you see a different Alina in the second book, not in terms of the character in itself, but the maturity of the character. She matures quite a bit from the moment we find out about her orphanage and her backstory until we see her in here in this book dealing with the things that she deals with in this story. And of course, I'm not going to go into detail at what the story is about. I know most of you have probably already read this book, or but I'm just thinking about those people that may come across this video and haven't read the story. And I really don't want to give spoilers because I would be horrified if I was given spoilers accidentally when I was watching a YouTube video. So if you're watching this video, if you haven't read this book, all I have to say is, in my opinion, this storyline that is basically the same. We just keep the storyline. It just keeps itself very steady and very nicely written by Leigh Bardugo. you don't feel like the story is disconnected, because sometimes you read the second book of an installment and it feels sometimes disconnected to the first part of the story, if you know what I mean, the first book. But this book doesn't feel disconnected at all. All characters, especially one of the characters that we are introduced to in this book, I really like the way he is, the way he portrays himself, and the ways there is that dubious feeling about this particular character. You don't know if you can trust the character entirely or if you can't trust the character entirely. So all the time you are judging the characters by their behavior, by how they're speaking to each other. And I just really like the atmosphere that this book is set as well, because it's a world so magical, but at the same time so relatable, that it just makes you keep reading, and it makes you feel like you want to become a character in the book yourself, become a Grisha yourself. And I just love the way Leigh Bardugo explore the powers of these characters and even the dynamics of power within their lives and what they do on a daily basis. So this book, although it's fantasy, there are some elements of it that are so relatable. And honestly, it's such a good read, such a fun read at times. I laughed. You feel tense sometimes because there are certain scenes that are quite violent, and you know, you feel the struggles of the characters, and it's such a good book. Honestly, I can't praise this book enough. I really like it, and I would give it a 4 to 4 and 4.5 stars. That's how much I enjoyed this read. The second book that I started reading in April, but I actually finished reading in May, was The Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim. This is a book that I've read with a book club on Fable, and it's a book club from one of my favorite booktubers, who is Ruby Granger. I really like her YouTube account, I'm not going to lie. It's her book club, which is Reading with the Seasons. And every month she chooses a book for us to read that is a classic of the English literature. And that's why I was so drawn to her channel and so drawn to this particular book club, because this year one of my main goals is to read as many classics as possible, including classics from Brazilian literature, from English literature, and world literature in general. If I'm completely honest, I just want to read classics, either in English or in Portuguese. So her channel was really interesting to me since the beginning, and that's why I joined her book club on Fable, and I've been reading these books. And the first book that we started reading it in April, but I finished reading it in May, is The Enchanted April. And the book is really good. I really enjoyed reading. We follow the story of these four women. One of them finds an advertisement about this castle in Italy that will be rented for the month of April, just for the month of April. And she sees the advertisement and she feels compelled to go into this adventure, but she wants to find companions that could go with her. And obviously, I think the book is set in 1920s. She didn't want to go with her husband because she's struggling in her relationship at the moment, and she wants to find this castle, and these are the companions to share this journey with her, because she truly believes that this journey can be enlightening somehow. And then she approaches another lady that she doesn't truly know about, that she have never spoken to this lady. And she proposes to this lady to go with her in this adventure. But obviously, they would like to share the load between four women because of how much it costs to actually go to this castle in Italy, to rent this castle in Italy. And that's when we see them posting an advertisement on the newspaper, and they have these two other women coming to them saying that they would like to share this experience with them throughout the month of April. And then you find out that every single one of these women have their own struggles and their own reason to go away for the whole month of April, to find themselves, really. And it's really beautiful to see the character development. I think one of the most interesting things about this book is actually the character development. All the four women, all of them, you see them flourish in many different ways from the moment they meet each other in Italy to the moment they leave Italy. It's a very enchanting book. It feels like springtime. We're still in spring, so you can still read the book in springtime and get that feeling of spring. I think the scenery that is pictured to us of the gardens of the place and so on, and the views of the bay from the castle and all the whole area of the Mediterranean and how it feels to be in that place. It's such a beautiful and enchanting story. I honestly really enjoyed it. Let me just say that I was particularly disappointed by the ending. It wasn't a horrible ending or anything like it. I just thought it was a bit too rushed and abrupt. And there was another part of the story that I just felt like, oh, that's not very necessary. Something happened to one of the characters that I didn't think it would be necessary. I don't understand why Elizabeth von Arnim would have done that to that particular character. But apart from that, the book is really good and I highly recommend. I would give that book no doubt a four stars book. It's outstanding, amazingly beautifully written. And yeah, I was very surprised because I've never heard of Elizabeth von Arnim and the Enchanted April before I signed up for this book club on Fable. And I was really thankful that this book was there for us to read. It was a very enjoyable experience. It felt really good. So another book that I've read it was actually from the Fable book club as well, the Reading with the Seasons book club, and I actually read throughout the whole of May because it was intended to be read in May, was The Secret Garden. Once again, it's interesting because I've never read this book before. I've watched the film, one of the versions of the Secret Garden as a film, and I knew roughly what the story was about. But reading the book is a complete different experience. And I was at first very taken aback of how the story begins and how the children in the story are portrayed as, although having parents at the very beginning, of course, Mary, which was one of the main characters, she has parents, but she's so unloved that her whole complexion shows how much unloved she is and she feels. And that made me feel so sad at times. And the same about Colin, which is another one of the characters that we meet a bit later in the book, in contrast to Dickon, which is another one of the characters, another one of the children in the book, that he is much loved by his family and his mother. And he's such a wonderful character. He's smiley and he actually brings life to everywhere he goes to, especially because he has this big, beautiful relationship with the wilderness that surrounds him. And it's such a wonderful story. And I'm very glad I've actually got to read it. I would rate a 5. The Secret Garden, definitely a 5 for plot, for character development, for atmosphere. It's such an atmospheric book. And it actually makes you relate to some of the things that are said as well, and some of the lessons that you learn with all of those children and even the adult characters are very beautiful lessons to be learned in life at any stage of life. So I would have loved to read this book when I was growing up as a child or even as a teenager. But even as an adult, it felt really enchanting. It felt really, really good. So definitely recommend, if you have never read this book, to get yourself a copy or to get yourself on a Kindle or anything like it. Read it online because it's beautifully written. Even if you watch the film, it's worth reading the book because it's an amazing experience, extraordinary experience. I loved it. And the last book I've read in May was The Conjurer by Luanne Smith. And is a part of a trilogy, the Vine Witch trilogy, that I love so much. I can't stress how much I love this trilogy. It's thrilling, it's amazing. If you like fantasy and if you like diversity of characters, in terms of magical system and so on, you will love this book. Because at first, in the first book, we follow one of the characters that is a witch. In the second book, you follow a fairy. And in the third book, and this one that I've just read, which is The Conjurer, you follow a jinn. Yes, a genie. Honestly, it's just wonderful. I've never read a book about a character that is actually a jinn, like, from honestly, I've never read it. And it was such a good book. This is another trilogy that I was not expecting the second and the third books to be as good as they were. I'm going to say that the third book, the dynamic is a bit different, because I think because we follow a jinn and I'm not really familiar with their language and the way the characters behave and so on, I was not expecting to find many of the elements of their magic and so on in the book. But it was so surprising, and in a very good way, that I pretty much enjoyed the whole experience of reading the book. The second book is also a bit different. I'm actually going to probably do a video about the three books, about the trilogy, the Vine Witch trilogy, because I think if you do like fantasy, I think you're going to absolutely love these books because of how the characters are varied, how the magical system is varied, and so on. But this book particularly, The Conjurer, I like the plot. Absolutely love the plot. I'm not going to go into detail about the plot because I don't want to spoil anything, and I feel like compelled to not say much when I'm giving a book review. But in terms of the plot, what I can say is that you follow this Jean, and she has like a curse that follows her, and she went to prison because of that. And it's not really a curse in a sense of she was cursed by someone necessarily, but something happens. There is some elements that happened to her that made her get into this position of curse. And it feels like a curse, but it's not necessarily a curse. Oh, am I talking? Am I making sense? I hope I'm making sense. Um, she's not cursed as such, but something happens to her and she goes to prison because of that. And the whole story is finding out why she's back to that position, to the position that she didn't want to be, back in a town where that accident, murder, whatever happened. And she needs to find out if she's innocent or not, basically. And it's such a beautiful story because you find out the background, you find out about the jinn, and there is a prophecy involved and a dagger. That's all I can say. It's really good. Honestly, I would give this book a 4 stars, no doubt. Luanne G. Smith, she has such a good way of writing characters. I really like her characters because although you have a witch, a fairy, and a jinn, and they come together in many ways, many times throughout these books, they're so different, and even their magic is so different, and it feels so powerful. And I love books that have women as central characters, and you follow these characters, their development, how they feel about each other, how they feel. There are some moral questions that are raised in these books that are in the whole trilogy that are really interesting. And yeah, I'm just going to say that I love the story. I don't really want to say much because I'm going to make a video about these 3 books, and I'm going to give a bit more into it because I don't want to give spoilers. I have to be very careful not to give spoilers here. But yeah, and these are all the books that I've read in the month of May. Well, we're now at the end of this amazing journey throughout the whole of May regarding my reading. Thank you very much for watching this video. I'm going to be posting more videos soon, and I'm very thankful to have you here. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye bye.